Welcome back to our next installment on Animal Phys. This is all about the kidney and osmoregulation, which is just like regulating water in your body. But the kidney is shockingly fascinating. I know you probably don't think of the kidney that much, but it's pretty cool, actually. So let's dive in. Let's get into it. Let's learn why I think the kidney is cool. So overall, what does the kidney do? It deals with excretion of waste, right? It deals with keeping your body clean, getting rid of metabolic waste. So if you have too many ions, too many nutrients, too much water, right? That's the kidney's job. It maintains homeostasis. Osmoregulation is the control of water balance of the blood, tissues, cytoplasm, whatever it may be, but it's the control of water balance, again, maintaining homeostasis. The idea here is to keep your body in balance because once it goes out of balance, that's how your cells either shrink up or burst with too much water. Not good. You want to be in balance. Balance in all things. Now, let's talk about the kidney itself. Doesn't even look like there's that much, right? Like, you're fine. So cortex is the outer layer, medulla is the middle layer, and then renal pelvis is the inside. On the right-hand side of this, you have the renal artery and renal vein, right? Artery is blood coming in, away from the heart, so into the kidney. Renal vein is taking blood out. So renal artery is carrying what we're gonna refer to as dirty blood that needs to be cleaned, and renal vein is carrying the clean blood. And then the ureter leads to the bladder. So again, this is what I just mentioned, right? Renal artery carries unfiltered blood. The cortex contains blood supply to the nephron, which is a piece that we're going to dive into in a minute, and parts of the nephron, right? This is where ultrafiltration happens. Ultrafiltration is the filtration of blood to clean it. The medulla contains the loop of Henle. This is part of ultrafiltration, part of the nephron. This is where water gets reabsorbed if necessary. Renal pelvis is where urine is dumped out and into the ureter. So the water that gets that does not get reabsorbed ends up in the pelvis. Renal vein carries filtered blood away, and ureter carries urine away. Now, composition of blood, I don't know. This is what's normally in your blood, but you don't want too much of this at any given time, right? So renal artery is the unfiltered blood. So compared to the renal artery, which is unfiltered, the renal vein has lowered urea, which is your nitrogenous waste. As a human being, you have urea, lowered salt, lower water, the same amount of glucose, the same amount of protein, and the same amount of blood cells. If you are going to the bathroom and you see blood in your urine, call a doctor. You do not want blood to be released into your urine. That's bad. Same with protein and glucose. If there's glucose in your urine, typically that's a warning sign that you have diabetes. So the only thing that we're really taking out is nitrogenous waste, salt, and water. And those items are what's going into your urine. So this is a nephron. Here's your cortex. So this is the outer layer of your kidney. So this part is on the outer layer of your kidney. The medulla, this is on that middle layer of your kidney. So the afferent arteriole is what's bringing it in, right? The inside, it's like the beginning. Efferent is like the exit. So this is your blood leaving. Okay, so this red thing is like your arteriole, which is like a really tiny artery. And then it goes through and then it leaves. So first step is Bowman's capsule. Then the proximal convoluted tubule. It's called proximal because it's close to the Bowman's capsule. So it's closer, so it's proximal. PCT for short. Then it goes down to the loop of Henle where water absorption occurs. Then distal convoluted tubule because it's further away from the Bowman's capsule. So it's distal. It means further away. if you take anatomy, you've heard these words before, but if you're going into like nursing or anything medical, you will love and hate learning all of these types of words. And then finally, it goes into the collecting duct, which leads to the bladder. Now, all of this is all part of filtration. This is like the part, even though the kidney is like known for filtration, it's actually the nephron within the kidney that does all of the filtration. And you have so many nephrons in a kidney, and you have 2 kidneys. Your body is constantly filtering blood, constantly. So just like getting into like the basic structures and functions, afferent arteriole brings blood, efferent arteriole removes blood. The glomerulus is like where the Bowman's capsule is. The glomerulus is like the outside of the Bowman's capsule. The peritubular capillary beds is just like where all the capillaries are around the entire nephron, which is how reabsorption happens. And then big picture here, Bowman's capsule is ultrafiltration. Proximal convoluted tubule is selective reabsorption, right? Like salts, ions, stuff like that. Loop of Henle is a sodium concentration gradient, which means there's different amounts of salt, which brings out water via osmosis, right, to absorb water. Distal convoluted tubule regulates ion concentrations and water balance. If you like took too much out for reabsorption or you didn't take enough out, this is like final checkpoint. And then collecting duct is reabsorbing water if necessary. So let's start at the beginning. This purpley thing is your glomerulus. And then you have your Bowman's capsule is like this part where it has these like little cells, which deals with taking in the filtrate and dealing with that. So Bowman's capsule does ultrafiltration, and I'm saying ultrafiltration because it's like mega filtration, right? Like ultimate, like super a lot. I don't know how else to say it. So you have a high blood pressure, and as it's going through this, because the blood pressure is so high, it's forcing water ions and small solutes like salt from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. So you have this area is like, again, the glomerulus, it's forcing it all out into the Bowman's capsule. So ultrafiltration is the production of filtrate, which is like water, ions, small solutes, from blood. And this whole area with these like basement membrane and these like tiny cells, this fenestrated capillary bed, okay, that means that it has holes in it. All of that is controlling what is actually leaving the blood and what's staying within the arterioles. Okay, once we get into the Bowman's capsule, we're still there, but we're like now talking about actually moving the filtrate through. So a lot of blood plasma goes into the filtrate because of this high blood pressure. Okay, the differences in diameter of the 2 arterioles, the afferent and efferent, increase pressure, and the capillaries are fenestrated, which just means that they have holes in them so that the filtrate can go through. The proteins and cells don't enter the filtrate because they are too big to fit into these fenestrations or pores. And the basement membrane, which is like this like white and blue thingy right here, this prevents, it's like an extra wall of protection that prevents all of these things from leaving. And then podocytes, which are like these things, these like tan, I don't know what color that is, yellow, control the filtration of small molecules again. So look, this fenestration is large. Then you have this basement membrane, which sort of like prevents large things from going through, but then there's even smaller holes so that even like if things were like happen to get by these first 2, this is like the 3rd line of defense here. Okay, then the proximal convoluted tubule is a single layer of epithelial cells, so like small square cells easy transport, easily moves the filtrate out into the intercellular fluid to get picked up by the passing capillaries. This is reabsorption with active and passive transport, which means that reabsorption happens with and without energy. This is active transport of hydrogen ions, sodium, chloride, potassium, glucose through protein pumps, so that's where your energy comes in, and it leaves the filtrate to be returned to the bloodstream. This is stuff that you actually do want in your body, and so even though it gets passed through because it's so tiny, it gets like sent in through ultrafiltration, you want it in your body, so it gets reabsorbed as long as you don't have too much of it, right? And then passive transport of water through osmosis. Water follows ions. So if you have a high amount of salt, let's use salt as an example. If you have a high amount of salt leaving the proximal convoluted tubule and it's like just chilling outside in this intercellular fluid, that's super salty liquid water, like bloody water, and your body does not like that. It does not like to be out of balance. So instead of having a super salty area and a not salty area, water is going to leave to balance out the amount of salt that's out there. So osmosis is the idea of water moving from a high concentration to a low concentration. But in your body, water is always going to follow the ions, right? Because it wants to be in balance. Always wants to be in balance. Homeostasis wants to be in balance. So you're going to hear a lot about this water following the ion situation. So if that does not make sense, we'll talk about it more in class, but definitely want to be cognizant of the fact that water doesn't move just willy-nilly. It wants to constantly be in balance. Now, the loop of Henle is a salt gradient created in the medulla, this middle part of the kidney, and this is where water reabsorption happens. So passive, and the descending loop, this part that goes down, passive transport of water out, impermeable to salt. Then ascending is sodium ions are pumped out, impermeable to water. So this is this idea of osmosis, water moving out to match up with the concentration outside, versus diffusion, ions moving out in a high to low, so that high to low concentration, so that again we're hitting balance. Okay, as the loop descends, so the further into the medulla you go, the saltier it becomes. The capillaries that surround this loop flow in opposite directions, so you have like even saltier areas because it's not picking up. It's like going the opposite of what's happening, so it's not picking up the salt or the water the way that you would expect it to, which just compounds this and makes this interstitial fluid even more salty. Now, the salt gradient, okay? So, again, as you're going down, you have your salt, or your water coming out, and it's getting saltier and saltier, and then on the way up, you have your salts coming out, which again is increasing the salt concentration. The length of the loop of Henle is positively correlated with the need for water absorption in animals. So maybe you've heard that camels do not need to drink a lot of water because, well, they maintain water in their humps and stuff, but like another reason for that is they have a wicked long loop of Henle, and because of that, they can reabsorb like all the water that they drink ever, and so they can keep it without having to urinate and release all that water. So the longer the loop of Henle, the less need for drinking water because you are able to absorb more water. All right, the distal convoluted tubule, this is this like orangey one over here. This is active transport of hydrogen ions into the filtrate, possibly drugs as well. So this is where like the final, not reabsorption, because obviously you're not constantly on drugs, or you shouldn't be, but this is the secretion of this is where that would happen, and reabsorption of different ions, different salts from the tubule into the capillaries. So again, it's just sort of like secretion reabsorption. That's what this whole thing is. And then the collecting duct is active transport of salt back to the blood, reabsorbed, and passive transport of urea and water, again reabsorbed. And again, as a reminder, urea is the nitrogenous waste. And then there's ADH. ADH is antidiuretic hormone. It's produced in the hypothalamus, released by pituitary, and targets these two areas, this orange distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, and it forces kidneys to reclaim water. Okay? So it is released in response to dehydration. ADH increases the permeability of the collecting duct so that more water can be absorbed. This is like if you didn't drink water all day, your body would start producing ADH so that whatever water you still have in your body gets reabsorbed so that your body doesn't like go into death. The cells don't die because there's no water, right? So if there's less water going to your urine, that means that your urine becomes more concentrated, which means your urine is going to be like a darker color, more yellow. If you are really well hydrated, your urine is typically clear or clearer, lighter in color. When an individual is rehydrated, you start drinking water again, ADH levels decrease, and less water is reabsorbed, and that's when you either have to go to the bathroom more often, or at least when you do go to the bathroom, your urine is clearer. Okay, so just in general, what do these 4 items, like in relation to your blood and your urine, how does this all work? So blood cells, filtrate should have no blood cells, none, 0. You do not want bloody urine. Bad news, terrible, don't. If this happens, call the hospital. If you have blood in your urine, it's a sign of kidney malfunction or infection. It's not good. If your body can't filtrate properly, that's a lot of things that are going to go wrong because your body needs to reabsorb and secrete all of these things we've been talking about. If proteins are present in the blood plasma but not present in the glomerular filtrate or urine, ideally that's what happens, right? Proteins are in your blood always, but you don't want them in your urine because they can't really pass across the membrane because they're too big. And then glucose, again, present in blood, not in urine. Normally, if it is present in urine, typically that's a sign of diabetes. It's selectively reabsorbed, and it's reabsorbed from the filtrate into the blood by active transport. And then drugs, most drugs make their way from the bloodstream into the kidneys and urine. This is why when you take a drug test, you have to pee in a cup because your kidneys will filtrate the drugs out. This is, again, we've been talking about this, but diabetics have higher levels of blood glucose because they either cannot secrete insulin or they have an insensitivity to insulin, depending if you're type 1 or type 2. So that means that all of the glucose is not reabsorbed into the blood. And so all that glucose, it just becomes saturated in your blood. It becomes saturated in your urine. The protein pumps can't work as well because they're just overwhelmed with the amount of glucose that's there. And so this is... the glucose will eventually find its way into the urine, and then you can detect that using test strips. So the last little bit is talking about hemodialysis, and then we're going to talk about some adaptations quick. So hemodialysis or kidney transplant. What are they? What's the benefits? What's going on? So a transplant, obviously your tissues must match. You have to suppress your immune system so that your body doesn't immediately reject the new kidney, but the waiting list is wicked long. So you can get a family to donate, or if someone dies and they're an organ donor, then you could get it that way. But the blood type must match based on like what we learned in the last 11 11.1. Also, fun fact about kidney transplants is they don't actually remove the kidney that doesn't work. They just leave the broken kidney in there, and then you have 3 kidneys. One that doesn't do anything and 2 that work. So that's cool. And then dialysis is basically having a nephron do all of the work, but outside of the body. So the blood is pumped into a device, like all of your blood is pumped out of your body, not at the same time, but that would kill you. But enough blood is pumped. This takes hours to do, by the way, and you have to do it like 3 to 5 times a week. All of your blood is pumped out. It goes through this whole dialysis solution, which helps balance water and ions. Basically does exactly what your nephron does, but outside of the body. And then it goes back into your body as clean blood. All right, so different types of nitrogenous waste. I told you that we use, our nitrogenous waste is urea, but the different types of nitrogenous waste are a result of protein and nucleic acid metabolism. So in lots of animals, too many amino acids undergo deamination, where the amino group is removed and incorporated into either ammonia, urea, or uric acid. So fish excrete ammonia. Because they live in water, they can dilute ammonia, because ammonia is very toxic. So if we had ammonia and we were secreting ammonia, we would end up poisoning ourselves. This does not require high energy because they're surrounded by water. So it's just constantly sort of like through osmosis doing this. And then mammals and amphibians excrete urea. This is us. Only toxic at high concentrations. You don't need as much water. Still some water, right? That's what urine is. And requires more energy because you have to go through the whole like nephron process. Constant filtering. Urea can be stored temporarily, but again, too much of it, or if it's too high of a concentration, is toxic. And then birds and reptiles excrete uric acid. This is insoluble in blood and cytoplasm and can be stored in specialized structure in eggs as embryos develop. So interesting. Less water needed, but requires a lot of energy to do this. Okay. Last bit is all about these adaptations of these. So there's like 3 more slides. So animals can either be osmoregulators or osmoconformers. An osmoconformer is like a marine worm or mollusk and the inside tissues have the same solute concentration as their environment. This is isoosmotic. Okay, they are in balance. So it's just constantly conforming to whatever is going on in their environment. There's no difference. If it gets saltier, then their body gets saltier. If it gets more watery, then their body gets watery. Osmoregulators is like us, where our internal tissues have a different solute concentration compared to our environment. I do not live in salt water, right? Even though my body has salt in it, I don't live in a saltwater environment. So I need to constantly be expending energy to regulate my water. Now, desert animals have a lot of adaptations that are important. So a longer loop of Henle, which we've sort of talked about already, but desert animals have longer loops of Henle. They have a large hypertonic area for water reabsorption. Hypertonic means that there's a higher solute concentration outside, so the water will go out instead of stay in and be released. So hypertonic means higher solute concentration outside of the cell or the nephron than inside. Using the ADH collecting duct mechanism, this is how they are able to get more water reabsorption. They release very little water in urine, and their water intake comes almost exclusively through their food. Some animals, like this kangaroo rat, which is pictured here, are nocturnal because it's not as hot as night, so they're not sweating or releasing water in that way either. And some other adaptations, Malpighian tubes in insects. So insects have an open circulatory system, which means the blood just like exists. It's not inside vessels, it's just like in their body. So these tubules lie in pools of blood within the cavity. So these actual tubules, these like yellow things, just sit in blood. So they're closed at one end and open into the gut. So blood enters into these tubules and then selective reabsorption happens in the tubules. So the useful substances just like get spit back out into the blood pool, and then everything else are emptied out into the gut and then released with feces. So they just sort of like constantly have blood flowing through them, and then it either goes back out into the blood or it goes into the gut. Which is a weird way to end this lecture, but that's how we're going to do it. So good job. I will see you in class.